Hidden within the vast landscape of ancient faith lies a mystery that few have dared to explore. A book once revered by prophets and teachers, yet later erased from the sacred canon. Known as the Book of Jubilees, or the Little Genesis, it retells the origins of creation, humanity, and divine law with breathtaking detail and authority. Its pages speak of heavenly order, angelic revelation, and the rhythm of time as it was first established by the Creator. For centuries, this book shaped the faith of early believers, guiding them toward a deeper understanding of divine purpose. Yet somewhere along the journey of history, its voice was silenced. Why was such a radiant light hidden from the world? What secret truth did it carry that made it too powerful or too dangerous to remain in plain sight? Across ancient deserts and sacred mountains, the Book of Jubilees once traveled among communities who believed it revealed the purest expression of divine order. It told of how time was divided, how law was written in heaven before it was given to man, and how angels themselves participated in the unfolding of creation. To those who heard its message, it was more than history, it was revelation. Yet as the centuries passed, councils formed, doctrines hardened, and choices were made about which writings would define faith for all generations. Among those choices was a quiet omission, and with it, an entire dimension of divine knowledge began to fade into silence. Imagine a world where truth is so radiant that it unsettles human authority. The Book of Jubilees spoke with that kind of brilliance. It presented a reality where divine law was eternal, unchanging, and unbending to the will of men. It described heavenly calendars kept by angels, laws inscribed upon eternal tablets, and a vision of creation where obedience was harmony itself. Such ideas left little room for human adjustment or institutional control. Over time, this uncompromising voice of divine order became inconvenient for those who sought to interpret truth on their own terms. So, like many other ancient texts that challenged earthly power, it was set aside, buried beneath the weight of tradition and time. Yet divine truth never disappears entirely. Buried beneath centuries of silence, fragments of Jubilees survived in hidden places, among the scrolls of Qumran, in the hills of Ethiopia, and in the memories of those who refused to forget. Its rediscovery in modern times has opened a doorway into a forgotten realm of sacred history. Through its words, one can hear echoes of Eden, feel the rhythm of divine time, and see glimpses of the original harmony between heaven and earth. It calls to the modern soul just as it once called to the ancients, to remember what was lost, to question what was silenced, and to seek truth unbound by human design. Every revelation has its appointed season. Perhaps the world was not ready to receive the message of Jubilees when it first appeared. Perhaps its wisdom was meant to sleep until a generation emerged that could listen without fear. Its reappearance in our age suggests that moment has arrived. The questions it raises about time, authority, and divine order have never been more relevant. As humanity stands amid confusion and change, the forgotten book returns as both challenge and invitation, to rediscover the sacred rhythm of creation and to align once more with eternal truth. If you are drawn to uncover mysteries like this one, to explore hidden wisdom and ancient revelations, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice helps this journey continue, and together we can bring forgotten light back into the world. When the pages of the Book of Jubilees unfold, they open a window into a vision of creation, both familiar and yet entirely transformed. The reader finds a retelling of Genesis that moves not merely through human memory, but through heavenly revelation. It speaks as though dictated by an angel to Moses upon Mount Sinai, describing in intricate detail how the universe was ordered, how time itself was measured, and how divine law shaped existence long before human understanding began to waver. The text takes the sacred narrative of beginnings and illuminates it with celestial authority, turning familiar stories into divine instruction. It offers a rhythm of holiness, an eternal echo of Eden, where every action has meaning and every moment carries the imprint of divine purpose. In these ancient words, creation is not presented as a simple event, but as a carefully structured sequence guided by heavenly wisdom. The Book of Jubilees insists that the cosmos operates according to divine order, one that mirrors the eternal structure of heaven. Angels are portrayed as keepers of that order, recording human actions upon tablets of light and maintaining balance between the realms of spirit and flesh. Within this framework, humanity is not left adrift, but placed within a vast, deliberate plan, one where obedience to divine instruction ensures harmony between heaven and earth. Such vision did not merely tell a story, it reshaped how early believers viewed their existence and their covenant with the Creator. At the heart of this book lies a deep yearning to restore what was lost after Eden. The narrative breathes the memory of a world where communion with the divine was unbroken, where the rhythm of days followed the pulse of heaven. Jubilees calls its readers to remember, to reclaim the sanctity of time and the purity of purpose that once defined humanity. It does not simply recount history, it reorders it, revealing that divine intention remains woven through every generation, measured in cycles of jubilees, marking sacred moments when heaven draws close again to earth. In retelling the stories of Adam, Noah, Abraham, and Jacob, Jubilees infuses them with divine commentary, interpreting their actions as parts of an eternal covenant. It portrays angels as intermediaries who watch, teach, and record, bridging the gap between the mortal and the immortal. Their presence reminds humanity that divine observation never ceases, that even in exile, the eyes of heaven remain fixed upon creation. This perspective offered both comfort and caution, for it suggested that nothing escapes divine awareness, not even the hidden thoughts of the heart. Many who read this sacred narrative in ancient times felt its authority surpass ordinary writings. It spoke not only of what happened, but of why it happened, drawing meaning from moments that seemed mundane in other texts. When Jubilees explained the flood, it described not just judgment but purification, a restoration of divine rhythm broken by rebellion. When it spoke of Abraham, it emphasized his adherence to heavenly law long before the Torah was written, as though divine instruction had always existed in heaven, waiting only for faithful hearts to remember it. What made the Book of Jubilees so compelling was not its beauty alone, but its daring claim to divine origin. It presented itself as revelation, not interpretation. It was not merely commentary on Genesis, but a direct transmission from the divine realm. To those who accepted its words, this book carried weight beyond comparison, for it claimed to restore forgotten truth given to Moses by the angel of presence. To those who guarded tradition, however, such authority posed a challenge. For if Jubilees spoke with divine voice, it questioned the completeness of the established canon. Hidden within its narrative is a calendar of holiness, a system that defines sacred time itself as part of creation's perfection. This calendar, unlike the lunar system that later prevailed, follows the pattern of 364 days, each cycle reflecting divine order, unchanging and precise. In this vision of time, sin is not only moral failure, but disruption of rhythm, a distortion of harmony between heaven and earth. To live righteously means to live in step with divine time, to celebrate festivals and Sabbaths exactly as they were set in heaven. This concept would become one of the book's most controversial features, yet it also reveals its deeper intent, to restore humanity's alignment with celestial law. Every page of Jubilees resonates with the longing to remember what humanity has forgotten. It portrays angels mourning over the corruption of time, prophets pleading for restoration, and patriarchs struggling to remain faithful amidst a world drifting from divine rhythm. It was not content to recount events. It sought to transform hearts, to remind creation that divine law was not imposed but inscribed in the very design of the universe. For early readers, this was not mere literature, but a call to return to the purity of the beginning, to rediscover Eden within obedience. Those who encountered the Book of Jubilees in the centuries before its disappearance could sense that it held something immense, something too radiant to be safely contained. It drew a map of heaven's relationship with earth, revealing patterns that later generations feared might disrupt their own systems of power and worship. In its reverence for order, purity, and divine timing, it carried an authority that transcended institutions, for it placed heaven, not human interpretation, at the center of truth. Long before its suppression, the Book of Jubilees stirred hearts and minds with questions that few dared to voice. Could it be that divine truth was more expansive than the boundaries men had drawn around it? Could the voice of heaven still be speaking through forgotten texts, waiting for those willing to listen? As these questions echoed through the centuries, the mystery of its disappearance would only deepen, leading to conflicts not merely of belief, but of who held power over time, faith, and divine memory. From the moment the Book of Jubilees introduced its heavenly calendar, it set itself apart from nearly every other sacred text. It described a structure of time, not as a human invention, but as an eternal pattern written before creation began. This calendar followed a perfect symmetry, 364 days divided into 4 equal seasons of 13 weeks each, creating a harmony that mirrored celestial order. To the authors of Jubilees, this was not mathematics, it was revelation. Each day carried divine significance, and each festival aligned with events recorded in heaven. Time itself was holy, and to live within its rhythm was to walk with God. Those who followed the calendar described in Jubilees saw it as more than a system of counting days. It was a covenantal map. Every Sabbath, every feast, every year of release was set by divine decree. To alter that order would mean distorting the relationship between heaven and earth. The text insists that angels themselves keep this calendar and that righteous beings are measured by their faithfulness to it. Such teaching made time sacred territory, a realm where human authority had no right to intervene. Once this concept took hold among ancient communities, it became both a source of unity and a spark of division. Ancient Israel's calendar debates were not merely technical disagreements. Behind each system stood a theology, a view of how closely humanity should mirror heaven. The solar calendar of Jubilees represented divine perfection, fixed and luminous. The lunar calendar adopted later by religious authorities was practical, flexible, and aligned with human observation. When the two collided, it was not only a conflict of astronomy, but of authority. Those who held power over the calendar controlled when festivals occurred, when offerings were made, and when sacred time began. By preserving the 364-day year, Jubilees implied that human alteration of time itself was a rebellion against heaven. Communities such as the Essenes, who lived near Qumran, embraced this calendar and guarded it with devotion. Their writings echo the same rhythms described in Jubilees, suggesting that they saw themselves as keepers of divine order in a world gone astray. To them, observing heavenly time was an act of resistance against corruption. They believed that when priests in Jerusalem followed the lunar system, they had abandoned the true covenant. The preservation of sacred time became a symbol of purity, an unbroken connection between earth and the angels. Within this framework, festivals such as Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Booths were not merely memorials of past events, but precise alignments with cosmic cycles. The appointed days were established long before Israel existed, woven into creation's foundation. To change them was to rewrite the music of the universe. For readers of Jubilees, obedience to the divine calendar was a form of worship equal to sacrifice or prayer. It reminded believers that even the passage of days must bow before the Creator's design. The controversy over calendars became one of the most decisive theological conflicts in ancient faith. For the authors of Jubilees, those who tampered with time were not merely mistaken, they were participating in deception. They believed that spiritual darkness had entered the world through confusion over sacred days. The text even portrays the angels mourning that humanity had forgotten the correct reckoning of time. Such imagery reflects more than sorrow. It reveals the belief that disorder in time leads to disorder in faith itself. Many scholars of later generations would interpret this as a symbolic struggle, but to ancient believers it was deeply real. To lose the true calendar meant to lose communion with heaven. When priests offered sacrifices on days not appointed by God, their offerings were considered void. When festivals were celebrated out of sync with divine timing, they became shadows of truth. The Book of Jubilees warned that such distortions would persist until the end of the age, when the righteous would once again restore the heavenly pattern. By promoting a calendar said to be kept by angels, the Book of Jubilees posed an immense challenge to religious authorities. It claimed that divine law was eternal and unchangeable, leaving no room for human adjustment. Institutions that sought to regulate worship, festivals, and observances suddenly found their authority questioned. For that reason, the text could not easily coexist with systems built on human consensus. In defending the calendar of heaven, Jubilees indirectly defied the powers that sought to redefine divine truth for convenience or control. This conflict reveals why the book's message was so unsettling. It was not simply about timekeeping, but about the very foundation of divine sovereignty. The insistence on perfect order declared that creation itself was structured around divine rhythm, not human invention. Such conviction left little room for compromise, and over centuries, those unwilling to yield to its authority began to distance themselves from it. What began as a debate over calendars became a silent struggle for the soul of sacred time. Even now, the echoes of that struggle remain. The 364-day calendar has never fully disappeared. Traces of it survive in ancient texts and in the liturgical cycles of communities that held to their ancestral ways. For those who still ponder the mystery of Jubilees, the question lingers: was time itself rewritten to suit human rule, or did heaven allow it as a test of faithfulness? The answer may lie not in the past, but in whether humanity still listens for the rhythm of eternity within the movement of days. Once regarded with reverence, the Book of Jubilees journeyed through centuries of devotion before fading into silence. Its words, once spoken among the faithful and copied by scribes who considered them sacred, gradually vanished from the libraries and councils that shaped the structure of Scripture. What began as a record of divine revelation became a forgotten echo, surviving only in scattered fragments and distant traditions. The story of how this book moved from honor to obscurity is a tale not only of religious decision, but of shifting power and fear of divine absolutes. In the centuries following its composition, Jubilees found devoted readers among communities, seeking purity and faithfulness to divine law. Among them, the Essenes treasured it as a guiding text, reading its instructions alongside the writings of Enoch and the Torah. Their discovery at Qumran, where scrolls preserved the words of Jubilees alongside canonical books, revealed how deeply it shaped their theology. To them, it was not apocrypha, but truth, a reminder of what the world had lost. Its calendar guided their observances, and its warnings against corruption mirrored their view of a temple leadership that had strayed from divine order. The early followers of Jesus were also aware of this book, and traces of its language can be found in writings from the first centuries of Christianity. Echoes of its teachings appear in the letters of early church fathers who referred to it as the Lesser Genesis. They recognized its emphasis on obedience, purity, and the eternal covenant. Yet slowly, as theology shifted toward institutional structure, references to Jubilees diminished. The councils that would later decide the boundaries of Scripture grew uneasy with texts that claimed direct heavenly origin outside their control. In the Western world, as the biblical canon took form through debates and decrees, Jubilees began to disappear from lists of approved writings. It was neither condemned outright nor embraced. It simply faded, omitted quietly as though forgotten by accident. Yet such disappearance rarely occurs without reason. The absence of this book from the canon reflected not indifference, but deliberate restraint, a choice to favor texts that fit evolving doctrine over those that questioned it. The book's portrayal of angels, divine law, and time unyielding to human adjustment conflicted with theological trends that sought balance between divine authority and human interpretation. In contrast, far from Rome and Jerusalem, in the mountains of Ethiopia, the Book of Jubilees continued to be cherished. Preserved in the ancient Ge'ez language, it became part of the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, read alongside other sacred writings long forgotten elsewhere. Its survival there serves as a quiet testimony to faith unbroken by the decisions of distant councils. For centuries, while Europe debated theology and translation, Ethiopian monks copied Jubilees with reverence, unaware that the rest of the world had consigned it to oblivion. The disappearance of Jubilees from the Western canon did not happen overnight. It was a gradual process carried by generations who valued conformity more than exploration. As Greek and Latin replaced older tongues, texts that did not fit the new order were left untranslated, their manuscripts abandoned to decay. The few that survived were dismissed as curiosities, remnants of an age when heaven seemed closer and revelation more direct. Scholars centuries later would rediscover fragments of Jubilees among the Dead Sea Scrolls and realize that what had been forgotten was once considered sacred by those who lived nearest to its time. Such loss raises questions about how humanity chooses which words to preserve as divine. Was it theology that decided Jubilees' fate, or the subtle influence of power-seeking unity through limitation? The councils that formed the canon claimed to guard truth, yet in guarding, they also excluded. Texts that spoke too directly of heavenly authority or that challenged human mediation were quietly removed from the conversation. The result was a canon shaped not only by faith, but by fear of what could not be controlled. Across centuries, the silence surrounding Jubilees deepened. Generations grew up unaware that such a book had ever existed, its teachings buried beneath layers of tradition. The wisdom it carried, its calendar, its visions, its insistence on obedience to eternal law, was replaced by systems more flexible, more human. Yet even as it disappeared from sight, echoes of its message survived in rituals, prayers, and patterns that still trace back to its pages. Its influence lingered like an unseen current, subtle but unbroken. Modern discovery of Jubilees among the Dead Sea Scrolls reignited curiosity about why such a profound text vanished from the mainstream of faith. The question reached beyond history into theology itself. Could divine truth be suppressed, or did heaven allow its concealment until a time when the world would listen again? Each fragment unearthed spoke of an ancient voice refusing to be silenced, a testament to revelation that outlasts rejection. Every vanished book tells a story, yet few carry the aura of divine purpose as strongly as the Book of Jubilees. Its journey from reverence to rejection is not merely the loss of a text, but the reflection of humanity's struggle with divine order. Those who silenced it may have believed they were preserving purity, but in doing so, they concealed a vision of time, law, and creation that spoke too directly of heaven. The world may have forgotten it for centuries, but history has a way of uncovering what was meant to endure. Long before the canon of Scripture was finalized, sacred writings existed in abundance. Prophets, visionaries, and teachers recorded what they believed to be divine truth, each text echoing a different facet of revelation. Across centuries, these writings circulated through temples, synagogues, and early Christian gatherings, forming the spiritual landscape of countless believers. Yet, as faith traditions grew, so did the need for boundaries. Religious leaders began to decide which voices would be preserved and which would fade into silence. That process, though often framed as divine guidance, was also deeply human, shaped by politics, power, and fear of disunity. In those formative centuries, councils gathered to define orthodoxy. Leaders sought to unify beliefs, to establish one faith that could withstand heresy and fragmentation. Decisions made in candlelit halls would determine which words would be read aloud in worship and which would be hidden from the faithful. Behind those choices lay an unspoken struggle between spiritual revelation and institutional order. When men sought to preserve purity, they also sought control. By declaring certain texts unfit for public reading, they shaped the boundaries of divine truth itself. The Book of Jubilees, with its uncompromising tone and claims of heavenly origin, did not fit the mold of a religion seeking to centralize authority. Throughout early history, voices that challenged established hierarchies often met resistance. Writings like Jubilees, Enoch, and others portrayed divine law as eternal and unchangeable, leaving no room for human adaptation. Their depictions of angels, cosmic order, and pre-existent commandments clashed with interpretations that emphasized human mediation. To preserve unity, leaders favored texts that reinforced institutional structure rather than those that placed divine revelation beyond human control. Over time, decisions once meant to protect faith transformed into instruments of exclusion. As the Roman Empire embraced Christianity, the stakes grew even higher. A single faith, sanctioned by imperial authority, required a single canon to define it. Councils convened under imperial watchful eyes, their choices shaping the theology of nations. Within that environment, texts that portrayed divine truth as independent of human authority became inconvenient. A book like Jubilees, which emphasized heavenly law and cosmic accountability, risked undermining the power of church hierarchy. Silence became the simplest solution. Rabbis faced similar dilemmas as they rebuilt Jewish identity after the destruction of the temple. They sought coherence, continuity, and survival under foreign rule. The canon they shaped reflected both reverence and pragmatism. Books that reinforced covenantal law and communal unity were preserved, while those that hinted at direct revelation beyond rabbinic interpretation were set aside. Jubilees, with its angelic transmissions and perfect solar calendar, represented a theology too rigid for evolving Judaism. Its exclusion became both theological and practical, a way to maintain control over sacred tradition in uncertain times. Behind every act of canon formation stood scribes, translators, and scholars who wielded immense influence. Each decision about inclusion or exclusion shaped humanity's understanding of divine truth. Some saw themselves as servants of revelation. Others acted as guardians of institutional stability. Over centuries, debates turned into doctrine, and what began as dialogue became dogma. The Book of Jubilees was not condemned as heresy, but quietly omitted, its light dimmed beneath the shadow of sanctioned scripture. The pattern repeated across generations. Revelation gave way to regulation. Mystery yielded to hierarchy. Writings once loved for their spiritual depth became suspect when they questioned authority. As languages changed, manuscripts decayed, and priorities shifted, the memory of these texts faded. Yet behind the curtain of history lingered a question that could never fully disappear. Did humanity define holiness, or did holiness define humanity? Among early believers, whispers persisted that certain truths had been hidden intentionally. Scholars and monks spoke of lost books, sealed writings, and secret wisdom. The idea that divine knowledge could be suppressed for fear of its power captured the imagination of many. Those who stumbled upon fragments of Jubilees in later centuries sensed that the process of canonization had been less about inspiration and more about influence. It was not only faith that determined what was holy, but the hands that copied, the councils that voted, and the rulers who approved. Over time, the canon became more than a collection of books. It became an instrument of order. Its boundaries defined orthodoxy, and its silence defined heresy. To question those boundaries was to question authority itself. Yet history shows that truth cannot be imprisoned forever. What human councils concealed for convenience, divine providence preserved in hidden corners of the world. The Book of Jubilees stands as a witness to that struggle, a testament to the tension between revelation and power, between the purity of faith and the politics of belief. Within the heart of the Book of Jubilees lies one of its most profound and unsettling teachings, the existence of heavenly tablets. These celestial records, said to be written by the hand of angels, contain the blueprint of creation itself. They preserve the laws, the destinies, and the appointed times for every nation and every soul. According to this vision, nothing unfolds by accident. Each event, each generation, follows a divine script inscribed before the foundation of the world. For those who read these words with faith, it offered comfort. For those who sought control, it represented danger beyond measure. Heavenly tablets reveal a vision of reality that transcends time. They declare that divine law is not a matter of human interpretation, but an eternal decree. Sin, righteousness, birth, and destiny are all recorded within them. Every promise made by God, every covenant broken or restored, exists within their lines. This notion transforms morality into cosmic order, suggesting that justice is not reactive, but preordained. Such a concept challenged both priests and theologians, for it implied that divine will could not be rewritten by decree or debate. To ancient believers, the tablets symbolized the permanence of divine truth. The idea that law existed in heaven long before Moses received it on Sinai elevated obedience beyond ritual. It became participation in eternity. The words carved upon stone on earth were reflections of what had already been written above. When Jubilees spoke of commandments, it spoke not of innovation, but remembrance, urging humanity to live according to a pattern older than creation itself. That conviction made its message both transcendent and threatening. Religious authorities throughout history have relied on interpretation to guide the faithful. The existence of fixed heavenly law undermined that role. If every moral principle was already written and sealed, then councils, teachers, and traditions could only echo what heaven had already decided. This stripped human institutions of their flexibility, leaving no room for adaptation or compromise. For those invested in authority, such a worldview was intolerable. The heavenly tablets did not merely describe divine law, they limited human sovereignty. Scholars later speculated that this teaching might explain why Jubilees was viewed with suspicion. To admit the existence of immutable heavenly law meant admitting that human leadership could err in its interpretations. In a world built on theological hierarchy, that idea was revolutionary. Those who revered Jubilees saw the tablets as symbols of divine perfection. Those who sought to maintain order feared their implications. The concept blurred the boundary between heaven and earth, reminding all who read it that divine truth requires submission, not negotiation. Imagery of the tablets also revealed a universe deeply moral in structure. Every act of kindness, every word of deceit, every prayer whispered in faith was believed to be recorded in heaven. Nothing was forgotten. This belief carried immense weight for early communities, teaching that righteousness was not rewarded by chance, but recognized eternally. Life became sacred in every detail, and justice was understood as alignment with cosmic order rather than human fairness. To modern readers, such certainty may seem absolute, but to the faithful of ancient times, it was liberation from chaos. Hidden within these teachings lies a vision of humanity's purpose. Jubilees presents men and women not as authors of their destiny, but as participants in a divine narrative already composed. Their freedom lies in faithfulness, their meaning in obedience. That perspective dissolves pride and places creation in rightful harmony with its creator, yet it also strips away illusions of control. Those who shaped religion through interpretation and decree could not easily accept a doctrine that rendered their authority redundant. When viewed through history's lens, the notion of heavenly tablets stands as a metaphor for the eternal nature of truth. It suggests that divine revelation cannot be altered, even if humanity forgets or rejects it. Every generation may attempt to rewrite laws or redefine righteousness, yet the original script remains untouched in heaven's archives. That belief sustains the hope that what is lost on earth is still preserved above. For those who loved the Book of Jubilees, this was the assurance that no truth could ever be erased completely. Across centuries, the idea of these tablets has continued to inspire those who seek unchanging truth in a shifting world. They represent the divine memory that transcends history, the record of what was meant to be before time began. To imagine that such knowledge exists beyond human reach humbles the heart and reminds every soul of its place within the greater design. The silence surrounding these mysteries may not be accidental. It may be the world's way of shielding itself from a truth too absolute to manage. Among the ancient writings that shaped early faith, few carried as much influence as the Book of Enoch. Its visions of angels, judgment, and cosmic rebellion found strong resonance within the pages of Jubilees. Both books share a single pulse, a yearning to explain the tension between divine holiness and human corruption. They speak of a universe watched over by celestial beings, where obedience maintains harmony and rebellion unleashes chaos. Within Jubilees, the echoes of Enoch resound like thunder from an earlier revelation, uniting their messages into a single tapestry of divine justice. When Jubilees recounts the fall of the angels, it mirrors Enoch's account, but weaves it into a broader vision of history. It describes how divine watchers sent to guide humanity were drawn into temptation and transgression. Their union with mortals brought forth violence, arrogance, and knowledge unfit for humankind. The result was not only moral decay, but a distortion of creation's order. This narrative, shared by both texts, served as a warning to generations that power separated from obedience leads only to ruin. The sins of the angels became a symbol of pride that defies divine law. To ancient readers, such accounts explained the origin of evil in a world created by a righteous God. The story of the fallen ones revealed that corruption began not among humans, but among beings who once stood in light. It portrayed sin as rebellion against divine structure, a disruption of sacred harmony that rippled through creation. By retelling this story, Jubilees reminded humanity of its fragility, urging repentance and humility. It emphasized that righteousness is not inherited but chosen daily, in defiance of the same pride that once corrupted heaven. The connection between Enoch and Jubilees extended beyond shared stories. It represented a shared worldview. Both texts envisioned a cosmos governed by moral law, where angels, humans, and nations are accountable to the same divine standard. Both proclaimed that divine judgment is not vengeance, but restoration, a way of purifying creation from defilement. In their eyes, salvation was not escape from the world, but renewal of it, a return to order lost through disobedience. That vision carried both beauty and terror, for it demanded complete surrender to divine will. For early Jewish and Christian communities, these teachings held profound significance. The idea that angels could fall shattered complacent notions of holiness and invited reflection on the nature of free will. It portrayed sin as a cosmic contagion, spreading from heaven to earth. Yet it also portrayed redemption as universal, extending even to the descendants of those who had strayed. Jubilees carries that same hope, that no corruption is beyond healing, no exile beyond return, if humanity restores its alignment with divine rhythm. Such theology, however, became increasingly uncomfortable as organized religion evolved. The presence of fallen angels, celestial tablets, and heavenly calendars introduced complexities that later theology preferred to simplify. Church leaders favored doctrines that centralized grace within institutional sacraments rather than cosmic hierarchies. The mystical universe of Enoch and Jubilees was gradually replaced by systematic theology, more manageable and less threatening to ecclesiastical control. What was once seen as revelation became labeled as myth, yet traces of Enochian influence persisted in hidden ways. Concepts of angels, demons, and divine watchers found their way into later religious art, liturgy, and folklore. Even as official doctrine distanced itself from these sources, their imagery shaped the spiritual imagination of generations. Behind sermons and prayers lingered the shadow of a greater story, one that refused to disappear entirely. Jubilees preserved that story, not as legend, but as testimony that divine justice remains active, watching, recording, correcting the errors of creation. Readers who encountered both books felt that they completed one another. Enoch described the heavens, while Jubilees structured time. One revealed divine judgment, the other divine order. Together they portrayed a universe guided by purpose, where nothing escapes the gaze of God. Their union created a theology that saw history as cyclical, unfolding in measured patterns until ultimate restoration. Such a worldview left little room for randomness and reminded believers that every age repeats the same battle between the fallen and the faithful. Those who sought to remove Jubilees from circulation likely recognized the implications of its alliance with Enoch. Together they formed a body of revelation that transcended institutional interpretation. They invited readers to look beyond temples and councils to find truth written in creation itself. That autonomy was unsettling to those who governed belief through authority. Erasing Jubilees helped silence Enoch by association, leaving only fragments behind to whisper their defiance through time. Even today, the harmony between these two ancient books continues to stir those who search for lost wisdom. They reveal a vision of reality that joins heaven and earth, angels and men, obedience and freedom. Their message survives not through official sanction, but through resilience, a divine echo that refuses to die. The fallen may have sought to rewrite creation, but the faithful preserved its memory, ensuring that even after centuries of suppression, the story of divine justice still finds a voice. Centuries after the final words of Jubilees were written, its disappearance unfolded not through accident, but through careful neglect. Ancient scribes, scholars, and translators, those entrusted with preserving sacred memory, made decisions that reshaped history itself. As the sacred scrolls passed through their hands, choices were made about which writings deserved to be copied, translated, and taught. What was once cherished became forgotten, not because its message lacked power, but because it carried too much. The book that claimed to speak with heavenly authority, that described divine order beyond human reach, became an uncomfortable mirror to those who managed faith through hierarchy. Erasure often begins quietly. A manuscript left untranscribed, a scroll omitted from a catalogue, a citation left out of commentary. These small acts accumulate until an entire tradition vanishes. Scholars working in later centuries would call this textual loss, but within the world of ancient religion, it was deliberate shaping of memory. By excluding Jubilees from new translations and canons, scribes ensured that future generations would grow up without its voice. Over time, this silence hardened into ignorance, and what had once been considered revelation became rumor, a name whispered in theological debate without substance behind it. Within monasteries and schools of learning, the process of canonization became a craft of preservation and omission. Every copyist held the power to determine which truths survived. A book deemed inconvenient or heretical could vanish within 2 generations simply by being ignored. Yet the disappearance of Jubilees was more than neglect. It was an act of control over divine narrative. By removing a text that declared divine law eternal and heavenly, religious institutions secured their own authority to interpret and modify that law. In this way, silence became a weapon, gentle, invisible, but devastating. Cultural transitions also contributed to its fading. As the sacred languages of Hebrew and Aramaic gave way to Greek and Latin, texts that lacked translation access lost influence. When the Septuagint emerged as the primary scripture for Greek-speaking Jews and early Christians, Jubilees was left behind. Those who might have preserved it prioritized writings aligned with accepted theology, leaving this book stranded in a world that no longer read its original tongue. In a sense, language itself became a gatekeeper, closing the door on ancient wisdom. Historical records revealed traces of resistance against this erasure. In Qumran's caves, among the Dead Sea Scrolls, copies of Jubilees were hidden away by a community determined to safeguard it. They understood its importance, viewing it as an anchor of divine truth in an age of compromise. For centuries, those scrolls lay buried, preserved by desert dryness and divine design, until rediscovered in the modern era. Their survival serves as evidence that not all scribes bowed to silence, that among the faithful were those who refused to let the light of revelation be extinguished. As the Christian church expanded and sought unity, it grew wary of texts that emphasized angelic hierarchy or cosmic law beyond human mediation. The Book of Jubilees, filled with such themes, did not fit neatly within emerging doctrine. Copyists and commentators preferred writings that centered on grace and redemption rather than cosmic calendars and eternal tablets. Over generations, its absence from public worship meant its disappearance from collective memory. Faithful hearts no longer knew the sound of its voice. Every age believes its canon complete, yet history shows that sacred memory has always been shaped by power. What disappears does so not because it lacks truth, but because its truth challenges authority. The silence surrounding Jubilees reveals how easily divine wisdom can be hidden when institutions fear its implications. Those who erased it may not have considered themselves deceivers. They acted in the name of order, yet order achieved through omission carries its own form of rebellion, a rebellion against the fullness of revelation. Hidden within this silence lies a lesson about human nature. Knowledge that cannot be controlled is often suppressed, not destroyed. The act of forgetting becomes protection against transformation. Those who handled sacred texts may have feared that Jubilees would unsettle the faithful, that its calendar and heavenly law would question their traditions. To safeguard stability, they buried it beneath centuries of unspoken agreement. Yet truth buried remains alive, waiting for its appointed time to rise again. Even now, the rediscovery of lost manuscripts forces reflection on how much of divine revelation has been shaped by human decision. Each fragment recovered from the desert sands whispers of what might have been if every sacred voice had been allowed to speak. The silence of the scribes reminds us that history is never neutral. It bends beneath the weight of those who hold the pen. Jubilees was not lost by chance, but hidden by design, and its re-emergence centuries later stands as testimony that no act of erasure can endure forever. Far from the centers of theological debate, in the highlands of Ethiopia, a remnant of faith preserved what the rest of the world had forgotten. Within monasteries nestled among mountains and valleys, scribes of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church continued to copy and read the Book of Jubilees in their sacred language of Ge'ez. The Ethiopian Church maintained an unbroken line of faith stretching back to the earliest centuries of Christianity, untouched by many of the controversies that reshaped doctrine in the Mediterranean world. Its monks preserved ancient texts with quiet devotion, copying them by hand through centuries of isolation. Within their libraries, the words of Jubilees were read alongside Genesis, Exodus, and Enoch, forming a continuous story of creation, covenant, and redemption. They saw no boundary between canonical and apocryphal, only between truth and falsehood. Travelers who reached Ethiopia in the medieval era often recorded astonishment at finding scriptures unknown in their own lands. Among these were Jubilees, Enoch, and other writings long vanished from Western collections. For Ethiopian believers, these texts carried authority equal to any book of Moses. They spoke of divine order, angelic presence, and the unbroken covenant between heaven and earth. Their preservation was not an act of rebellion, but of obedience, to guard what had been entrusted by God, even if the rest of the world turned away. Within these monasteries, the transmission of texts was sacred duty. Each scribe regarded his task as service to heaven, aware that every word copied extended the life of revelation. The act of transcription itself was prayer. Over time, these manuscripts became treasures of a faith that refused to forget. Their endurance stands as proof that divine providence often works through obscurity, preserving light where few expect to find it. Cultural isolation proved to be both shield and sanctuary. Ethiopia's geographic distance from European and Near Eastern power centers insulated it from the waves of doctrinal standardization that swept through Christendom. While councils elsewhere defined canons and condemned heresies, the Ethiopian Church quietly followed its own sacred rhythm. This independence allowed Jubilees to remain untouched by suppression. Its message continued to inspire worship, guiding understanding of creation and covenant across generations. When Western scholars first encountered Ethiopian manuscripts of Jubilees, they realized that a bridge to the ancient world had survived intact. The Ge'ez text contained chapters and passages unknown in any other language, revealing how faithfully it had been transmitted. It became clear that what Europe had lost through silence, Africa had kept through devotion. This discovery challenged long-held assumptions about the flow of religious knowledge and reminded historians that divine truth does not belong to geography, but to those willing to preserve it. Beyond historical curiosity, the Ethiopian preservation of Jubilees carries profound spiritual meaning. It demonstrates that divine wisdom often finds refuge among the humble and hidden. While powerful institutions debated doctrine, remote monks quietly maintained the continuity of revelation. Their fidelity becomes a symbol of how truth endures outside the boundaries of recognition. In their dedication, one can see divine providence working through human faithfulness. Pilgrims who visit Ethiopian monasteries today still find echoes of this ancient guardianship. Chanting voices rise from stone chapels, carrying words first written thousands of years ago. The same text, once silenced in the West, continues to shape worship, teaching that divine law remains unbroken even when forgotten by empires. Through these communities, the Book of Jubilees has lived a parallel existence, hidden from global view, but never absent from God's plan. The story of Ethiopia's guardianship reminds every generation that revelation cannot be monopolized. What men exclude, heaven preserves through unexpected hands. The mountains that sheltered those sacred manuscripts became witnesses to the truth that divine knowledge will always find sanctuary where hearts remain faithful. As the modern world rediscovers Jubilees, it does so through the devotion of those who never abandoned it, a quiet lineage of belief that refused to let the sacred word die. Questions linger over why a book so filled with divine insight could vanish from the world for nearly 2 millennia. Historians trace the decisions of councils and scribes, yet deeper mysteries suggest that perhaps this disappearance served a higher design. Could it be that heaven permitted the silence surrounding Jubilees not as punishment, but as preparation? Each era of revelation unfolds according to spiritual readiness, and not every generation can bear the same weight of truth. The concealment of Jubilees may reflect a divine rhythm, hiding wisdom until hearts mature enough to receive it without distortion. Throughout Scripture, divine knowledge often arrives in cycles of concealment and unveiling. Prophecies sealed for future generations, parables spoken to veil truth from those unprepared, all echo this pattern. The words of Daniel describe visions locked away until the end of days, waiting for understanding to awaken. The removal of Jubilees may follow the same principle, truth hidden until its appointed time. In such a perspective, silence becomes mercy, and absence becomes part of revelation itself. For centuries, humanity struggled with questions of authority, law, and freedom. To preserve unity, institutions limited the scope of revelation, focusing on grace and redemption rather than celestial order. Jubilees remained central during that formative period. Its emphasis on strict obedience and divine time might have crushed hearts not yet ready for its demands. Its disappearance, then, protected the weak from burdens too heavy to bear. Divine wisdom often conceals itself when humanity risks misusing it for power. History shows that revelation grows in proportion to spiritual maturity. Ancient Israel received the law before grace was understood. Early Christianity received grace before divine order was restored. Each stage of faith builds upon the last. Perhaps heaven withdrew Jubilees so that humanity could learn humility before rediscovering cosmic truth. To approach the mysteries of heavenly law requires reverence beyond curiosity. For those who seek knowledge without surrender risk turning truth into domination. The rediscovery of Jubilees in modern times invites reflection on this divine timing. Humanity now stands amid both unprecedented knowledge and deep spiritual confusion. The return of this ancient text into awareness may not be accidental. Its message of divine order, sacred time, and eternal law speaks with renewed urgency in an age obsessed with human control. The same truths, once feared for their rigidity, now offer stability in chaos. What was hidden may now be revealed because the world has reached its moment of need. Such timing mirrors the divine pattern found throughout history. God's revelations emerge not when demanded, but when required. When darkness deepens, forgotten light returns. The reappearance of Jubilees challenges believers to see beyond historical loss and recognize divine orchestration. Its silence prepared hearts for rediscovery. Its absence made its return more meaningful. Truth, once concealed, gains new power when it re-emerges in a world desperate for constancy. Within that perspective, the disappearance of Jubilees becomes an act of divine pedagogy. Humanity's long forgetfulness teaches dependence upon revelation rather than human reason. The books return humble scholars who once believed they held the complete canon of truth. It reminds the faithful that divine wisdom cannot be owned, only received. Heaven reveals what it wills, when it wills, to those willing to listen. Contemplating this mystery transforms sorrow into awe. What seemed loss becomes preparation. What looked like silence becomes orchestration. The concealment of Jubilees may have protected its purity, sparing it from distortion during centuries of theological struggle. Now, in an age capable of preserving knowledge universally, its message can spread without being bound by institutional control. Hidden wisdom resurfaces when hearts are ready to cherish it for what it truly is, a reflection of eternal order rather than a weapon of authority. Perhaps heaven allowed Jubilees to vanish so that future generations would rediscover not just a book, but the humility required to receive revelation. Forgetting taught humanity that divine truth cannot be managed, only honored. Rediscovery calls for renewed reverence, a recognition that sacred knowledge belongs not to those who wield it, but to those who serve it. The silence of centuries, therefore, may not signify abandonment, but invitation, a pause before revelation's return. Modern rediscovery of the Book of Jubilees does more than fill historical gaps. It confronts humanity with a question that cuts across faith, culture, and time. What does it mean to live in alignment with divine order? The text speaks of sacred cycles, of days and seasons sanctified before creation, of obedience woven into the fabric of existence. For a world governed by mechanical clocks and shifting calendars, this call to rediscover sacred time invites transformation of both heart and rhythm. Jubilees teaches that time is not neutral. Every moment possesses moral weight. Every festival reflects heavenly alignment. Living within divine time means more than keeping dates. It means walking in awareness that life unfolds within sacred design. Humanity's detachment from this rhythm has produced spiritual dissonance, work without rest, progress without reflection, motion without meaning. To rediscover sacred time is to remember that rest, worship, and obedience are not obligations, but restoration of harmony with heaven. The ancient solar calendar described in Jubilees represents more than mathematics. It embodies stability, precision, and divine order. Its cycles reflect the constancy of God's faithfulness, unchanging across generations. Re-engaging with this concept does not require literal adherence, but spiritual remembrance. It calls believers to measure time not by productivity, but by holiness, to view each sunrise as renewal of covenant, each Sabbath as reunion with eternity. Jubilees reminds humanity that destiny unfolds through appointed moments, not random chance. Understanding this restores peace amid uncertainty. When time is seen as sacred, even waiting becomes worship. Reconnecting with divine rhythm also transforms how communities approach worship and rest. The ancient festivals of Israel, aligned with celestial order, were designed to draw humanity back into harmony with creation. Each feast served as a rehearsal for eternity, a reminder that life itself is cyclical renewal. In modern chaos, where days blur into endless motion, recovering that sacred pattern becomes essential for spiritual survival. Beyond ritual, the message of Jubilees challenges humanity to perceive existence as covenantal. Time itself becomes a temple, each hour an altar upon which gratitude and obedience are offered. When life is lived in this awareness, even ordinary tasks become sacred acts. The separation between sacred and secular dissolves, and the rhythm of heaven infuses every heartbeat. The message of Jubilees becomes not ancient history, but living guidance. Perhaps this is why its return carries such significance today. The same text, once hidden from view, now addresses a world drowning in distraction. Its voice calls humanity to remember that eternity is not distant. It is woven into every second. Rediscovering sacred time is rediscovering purpose, learning again that creation itself moves to the rhythm of divine love. Long after empires fell, languages changed, and creeds divided, the Book of Jubilees continued to breathe through the few who remembered. Every rediscovered manuscript, every translation, every whisper of its verses proves that divine truth cannot be permanently silenced. Though centuries of neglect buried its voice, the message endured like an ember glowing beneath ashes. No council, ruler, or scribe could extinguish what heaven had inspired. Across generations, the book lived in secret, preserved by devotion, protected by faith, and destined to return when the world once again hungered for the light it carried. Its survival stands as one of history's quiet miracles. From the caves of Qumran to the monasteries of Ethiopia, from fragments of parchment to printed pages in modern languages, the journey of Jubilees traces a divine pattern of resurrection. Every rediscovery mirrors the theme of renewal woven through its own narrative. Just as time itself moves in sacred cycles, so too does truth return in appointed seasons. Humanity may turn away, but revelation finds new hearts willing to listen. In that persistence lies proof that divine wisdom never dies, it only waits. To understand the endurance of Jubilees is to recognize the resilience of divine purpose. No human decision can truly erase what heaven has declared eternal. Each act of suppression became unknowingly a means of preservation. When the book was hidden, it was shielded from distortion. When forgotten, it was kept pure for a future generation. Its re-emergence marks not a coincidence, but a divine appointment, a reminder that every truth entrusted to creation will find its way back into light when the time is right. Within the words of Jubilees beats a rhythm of restoration. It calls the world back to remembrance, to purity of faith, to obedience guided by divine order rather than human ambition. It speaks across centuries, as if time itself bends to carry its message forward. Those who open its pages today step into a current of revelation that has flowed since the dawn of creation. They participate in a dialogue between heaven and earth, one that has never truly ceased. The endurance of this book is not about parchment or ink. It is about the eternal nature of divine wisdom. In a world flooded with noise, the survival of Jubilees reminds humanity that sacred truth moves quietly. It does not demand attention. It waits for the soul that seeks. Its endurance through exile, neglect, and rediscovery becomes a symbol of faith itself, tested, buried, yet indestructible. What was nearly lost now shines as proof that divine providence governs even the silence of history. Each surviving copy, each translation, each believer who encounters its message continues the story of Revelation's unbroken light. Every rediscovered truth carries a message for those living in the present age. Jubilees endured not only to testify of its own survival, but to awaken hearts dulled by complacency. It reminds humanity that divine revelation is never static. It continues to unfold through time, calling each generation to listen anew. The same God who guided prophets and patriarchs still speaks, and his voice echoes in every recovered word. To read Jubilees today is to participate in that unfolding, to touch eternity through the written word. This book's journey from obscurity to rediscovery mirrors the journey of faith itself. Every believer experiences moments of silence when divine presence seems distant and truth feels hidden. Yet just as the Book of Jubilees returned from centuries of absence, so too does faith rekindle when the heart turns again toward light. Its story becomes metaphor for spiritual endurance, the assurance that what is true can be forgotten but never destroyed. Through all the centuries of silence, Jubilees waited for this age, an age of rediscovery, where technology allows its voice to travel farther than ever before. Its return calls for renewal of devotion, reflection, and humility before divine mystery. As hearts awaken to its message, they are reminded that no truth given by God is ever lost. It may vanish from sight, but it never departs from purpose. The unbroken light that sustained this book is the same light that sustains every soul seeking understanding. Those who hold this book today hold more than a relic. They hold a living witness of divine faithfulness. The journey of Jubilees teaches that every truth worth keeping must be guarded, every revelation worth hearing must be cherished, and every silence may conceal a future revelation. Its endurance through centuries of suppression proclaims a message stronger than any decree. Light cannot be contained by darkness. What God inspires will always find a way to rise again. May the rediscovery of this ancient book inspire every heart to seek what has been hidden, to value what has been revealed, and to walk once more in harmony with sacred time. The light of revelation that refused to die now shines again for a generation ready to receive it. Its story reminds all who listen that divine wisdom does not fade. It returns when the world is ready to believe once more. Thank you for listening to this exploration of the Book of Jubilees and its extraordinary journey through time. If this message has moved you or opened your heart to new understanding, remember to subscribe to the channel so you never miss future episodes. Like this video to help it reach others who seek the same truth. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear how this story has inspired you. And finally, share this film with your friends and family so that together we can spread the light of wisdom, faith, and hope to every corner of the world.